All right, folks. It is Thursday, August the 8th, 2024. And of course, a lot of things are going on in the world, and we'll be talking about those on the World Edition. Of course, we've got world politics later on today as well. But it looks like Russia is claiming it halted a Ukrainian incursion into its territory, but the evidence seems to be suggesting otherwise, as the Ukraine battalions appear to be advancing 6 miles per day inside Russia. So that is something going on as they are having a incursion into Russia's Kursk region. So that's something that we're seeing in the news. And Austria is finding chemicals in the house of the suspected Taylor Swift concert attack plotter. So there are definitely some heartbroken fans. As a matter of fact, one of the fans said they were really heartbroken as the fans reacted to the canceled Vienna show due to the terror plot. So definitely that's something going on, and we'll find out how that goes and when the concerts start back. But apparently the suspect who had pledged allegiance to ISIS had chemical substances and devices found at their home. Japan issues a Nanka Trow mega quake warning after a 7.1 magnitude temblor. So that's something going on in Japan after that strong earthquake hit the Kyushu Island. So definitely looks like a 7.1 magnitude earthquake hit Japan, and it is triggering tsunami advisories. And speaking of advisories, we're having a steady downpour of rain here in Durham, North Carolina, as a result of Storm Debbie and all along those lines. And it definitely looks like we might have some flood warnings all the way until Friday, and maybe even a little bit beyond, as it has been consistently raining through the night and into the morning and all along those lines. So I think that it's supposed to be steady rain all day long, and like I said, maybe even to some of tomorrow as well. In the Middle East crisis, Israel strikes have killed at least 25 people in Gaza, according to the Palestinian Health Authority. And all along those lines, as a matter of fact, the quote from Al Jazeera English is, "It was an especially bloody day in Central and South Gaza as Israel attacks killed 27. And a bomb smuggled into a Tehran guest house months ago has killed a Hamas leader." That came out 4 days ago, but that's definitely something going on, as well as definitely these airstrikes are continuing there in that area. And Nobel laureate Yunus is making an emotional return to Bangladesh to lead a caretaker government. So Mohammed Yunus has landed in Bangladesh to lead that interim government. And UK anti-racism protesters are rallying to protect the Asylum Center. So anti-racist protesters fled the UK streets in show of solidarity against far-right riots. So the far-right promised violence and mayhem last night, but decency took back the streets. That is according to The Guardian. And the toll of 10 months of simmering conflicts on the Israel-Lebanon border is what some folks are talking about as war looms and flights dwindle. Lebanese grapple with whether to flee. So that's something going on as both Israel and Lebanon are awaiting new phases of that conflict, and foreign citizens have been urged to leave Lebanon as soon as possible as regional tensions spike. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news. And Israel vows it is prepared for retaliatory attacks from Iran and Hezbollah. So that's something else that in the Middle East. So tense Israel is waiting as attack threats looms, and the U.S. on 4th aircraft carrier and warship have reacted to the Middle East fighting. And the police are hunting an ex-Catalan separatist leader after their return from exile. And U.S. and other ambassadors are to skip the Nagasaki peace memorial over Israel's exclusion. So, U.S. ambassador to skip the Nagasaki bomb commemoration after Israel was excluded, and Nagasaki defends its decision not to invite Israel. So, definitely that's something else going on in that part of the world. And the White House says a deal between Israel and Hamas is as close as ever amid fears of a widening Middle Eastern war. So the White House is still pushing for a Gaza ceasefire as fears of a wider war in the Middle East escalate. So that's something else that is going on in the news as well. So, like I said, the Middle East is very much in the news, as is the UK, Ukraine, and others as well. The Thai court has dissolved the Progressive Move Forward Party. That's something else that is going on in the Asian theater. So the court has disbanded Thailand's most popular political party, and the chair, Cardin, condemns the dissolution of the Move Forward Party in Thailand. And Elon Musk is sharing fake news about England rioters being sent to the Falklands. So Elon Musk clashes with Keir Starmer over riots in Britain. So definitely that is something else going on as well. And it looks like the Venezuelan strongman was confident of his victory, and then came a shock. So it definitely looks like Maduro is clinging to power, but Venezuela opposition trounced Maduro, and that when that election took place a few days ago, and all along those lines. And an aid worker's airport disappearance steers fear of repression following those disputed claims of the election returns, and all along those lines. Let me get to a little bit of things in the U.S. news, and then I think I've got folks with me as well. So we'll see what they've got to say about some of these news stories and what else is on their mind as well. But definitely it's been some serious rain here in this area and along this kind of way and everything. Definitely it looks like folks are still looking at Tim Walz as he is the candidate, and all along those lines. And definitely there's some things going on with the campaign. I think he tried to make a joke about the couch remark, and all along those lines. And of course, there was an attempt where I think Vance was trying to upstage them by talking to the reporters and trying to force them to get Vice President Kamala Harris, now presidential candidate, to answer some questions. So I think that they are crisscrossing each other. So this could be an interesting political tactic by the Vance-Trump campaign to go to places that they know that the Harris and Walz ticket are going to as well. So definitely this should be interesting to see how this all plays out. And they're saying definitely a lot of things going on in that way. And definitely there's even audio showing Trump praising Walz in 2020 for the handling of the riots and to George Floyd's death, and all along those lines. So definitely it'll be interesting to see what goes on in this space. It looks like Kamala Harris stopped a rally in mid-speech to confront hecklers that were protesting the Gaza war, and she even scolded Michigan anti-Israeli protesters for making Trump victory more likely. So definitely that's something else going on in the news as well. So definitely a lot happening, including the weather here in Durham, North Carolina, and all along those lines. But let me get to my fine folks like Rick Rosner and Dan Worthington and see what they've got in their mind. How are you doing this morning?
All right, just woke up.
I understand. It's a good day to get up. Actually, I just got up not that long ago myself, but it is a rainy day for sure here in Durham, North Carolina. Matter of fact, I'm fortunate because they say 60,000 plus Duke customers are without power in the Carolinas as Debbie is moving along. I think there was even a news report I saw on one of our local stations where a young kid was had his roof ripped off,
Yeah.
and he was just trying to figure
It's going to be another 100-degree day here,
Wow.
which we're having the Olympics in 4 years,
Right.
and in July, which we shouldn't have it in July. We saw what happened in Paris. They had like a 97-degree day, which is terrible for sports and for the spectators. I'm hoping somebody has the good sense to move the Olympics to like May when the temperature's better.
But I think that they're always in July and August. So I think
No. I mean, at one year they had the 2020 Olympics in 2021 because of COVID.
that's true. So they could
And,
do it.
and somebody was telling me when they had it in Seoul, South Korea, they had them in September because I guess July and August are terrible in Korea.
Maybe that's the case. Maybe they can do them at a later time and all along those lines. Looks like Russian prosecutors are seeking a 15-year sentence for a U.S. Russian woman in a treason trial. So definitely that's something going on as well. So
Yeah, just don't go to Russia. If you're an American, don't go to Russia at all, at all, at all.
At all. Well, this was a Russian woman, and apparently she was a.
Okay, all right.
And it says Russian American, so I think she was had dual citizenship, but she was a ballerina and everything. But
no, that lady lives in America, and I guess and she donated $50 to Ukraine, and that's all. That's what she's on trial for.
For donating $50, a whopping $50.
Yes, so wow. It's another BS trial of somebody from America who thought she was okay to visit Russia. Can't do it now.
Yeah, can't do it now. Well, apparently in Utah, and I know you're over there in Utah, Dan, and everything. There is a attempt to execute Tabron Davy Honey in a murder of his then girlfriend's murder, and he even admitted that he's a monster and says that as he said for execution, he says he makes no excuses, but he wants mercy. So he's requesting a reprieve as the execution is set, I believe, for today and everything. Oh, actually, looks like he's too late. He was put to death by lethal injection in the state's first execution since 2010. So I just looked further into the story, and it looks like he was put to death and everything. So what is your take on the execution system and everything? Because this apparently was y'all's first execution in several years, and I guess he was trying to have a little bit of mercy, but the mercy was not to have happen in his case and everything. But what is your take on capital punishment?
Well, I support capital punishment in cases that are especially egregious. And I mean, some people are just irredeemable from the standpoint of they're sick and twisted and are a danger to society. Why continue to support them in prison for the rest of their life when they took a life in a heinous way and they deserve to die? I mean, people all around the world die for less than that. So there are some people who are for capital punishment, some people who are not for capital punishment. I am for capital punishment in particularly heinous situations. The question is, did he give the girl mercy when he murdered her and took her life? Hell no. Yeah. And he hasn't, and has no regrets. And he is, like he said, he's a danger. Why? So, Rick, I know you probably don't believe in capital punishment.
I can go either way depending on the deal is that I hate it in movies. I hate when the bad guy gets the bad guy. Usually they take down the bad guy in a movie and he's gonna face justice. And then the bad guy has one more hidden gun and pulls it out and then they go blow him away. And that always bugs me in a movie because then the bad guy doesn't get to suffer. His suffering is done. So I don't mind keeping somebody in prison for life who's a super bad person, because it means their suffering goes on. They don't get to check out.
It kind of depends on what you believe about the afterlife, right?
Yeah. So I don't trust the afterlife to exert justice. I think, it depends on. I don't like the death penalty in cases where they show that the killer has an IQ of 60. When there's significant question about whether the killer even committed the crime, I don't mind the death penalty in cases like Timothy McVeigh. Kill that guy, who blew up Oklahoma City. There are when it turns out, according to what I've read, that it costs more to kill somebody because of all the legal appeals to put them to death than it does to keep them in prison for life. So for the most, I'll look at it on a case by case basis.
So what you're telling me is it's really better to waste them when they're committing the crime, so we don't have to deal with all this and all the.
No, I said what. I mean, they do say that in the case if somebody's breaking into your house, some people will advise you to just straight out kill them, because if you only wound them, then you're going to get sued and you're going to be in court forever.
Lee Rhodes, hold on a second. Lee Rhodes asked an interesting question, as did Jatovia, and both of them are backstage. Jatovia may be joining us, but Lee Rhodes asked, is it humane to kill the mentally deficient? And he says that all life is precious. And I've actually had, before I bring in Jatovia, 2 cases that are family related that have dealt with the death penalty, and I've got to find out the result of one of them, because I have some second cousins that their mother was murdered by their father, and all along those lines in one of those situations, and he did go to trial. He was sentenced to life and everything, and then he went out on parole after having several hearings and all along those lines. And that's what I've got to check. I've got to remember whether he has since passed or not passed. That's what I do not recall, but I do know that my mother and other family members did go to those parole hearings. I think they were trying to testify in many cases to keep him in prison and everything, because they were somewhat close to that particular cousin, because the woman that died was actually my mother's first, if I remember the case correctly. But then, as I've mentioned to you on this show and other shows before, that UNC woman that I don't think they ever found her killer and everything was a uncle's niece, so it was on his side of the family, and I don't think that they ever found her killer and everything along those lines. Or actually, I take that back. I think they did find the killer, and now they're trying to do the trial. And whenever they do the trial, then it will be a matter of whether he gets life or whether he gets death and everything in that sense. So yes, I actually have
one issue I have with the death penalty is some states get it wrong a lot of the time. That they can't be trusted to evaluate the evidence and give proper representation to defendants. And so, I mean, I think Texas has, in the past few years, has had a bad record of up to 10% of the people they kill, there being significant questions about their guilt.
So there's been a whole group and a whole organization that has dealt with that. I don't know if I'm speaking out of school, but if he tells me I am, he will correct me. But I think Shaquille has been involved with the Innocence Project and other things, and there are other people that have been involved with it as well. By the way, Lee Rhodes says he's pro-life, consistent with no abortion and no capital punishment and everything along those lines. So yeah, it is a interesting issue and all along those lines. And like I said, I have some direct involvement. Actually, one of the ladies, ironically, Sasha, they were from Canada. The playwright was, when I went to that particular festival, and I met her, that nice young lady, and she wrote a play about a gentleman that was found to be innocent because it was one of those mistaken identities. And after he got out, because he developed, I think it was one of those diseases like hepatitis while he was in prison, and he was only eventually found free. And then after he was released, he lived for maybe 3 months and all along those lines. But what is your take? And am I speaking out of school? I hope I'm not, by mentioning your involvement with the Innocence Project, Shaquille, and everything. But definitely, what is your take?
I've donated money and resources to the Innocence Project. Look, I think that when you've got serious flaws in your system of justice, and it's not America, that this is unique, so everybody has flaws. I think it can be dangerous. I will say this: being born in Australia, we don't have the death penalty here. I think it's technically on the books for treason, but nobody's been killed here since I think the late 60s or early 70s, something like that. None of the countries that I've lived in or am a citizen of have the death penalty. Do I think that you should have it or you shouldn't? Look, I'm a little bit unsure how I feel about it. I think I would say that first we have to be very careful making sure the evidence is correct. But I'll also say that I don't think the death penalty is warranted for every murder, not even every premeditated murder. But I think that there are some crimes, there are some murders that are so shocking, so egregious, that are just so bad that the death penalty is the only thing that's appropriate, even if it costs more. Because I think that you devalued life, and there's one thing to have a harsh penalty like the death penalty in order to de-incentivize certain crimes from happening. There's another thing of maybe using the justice system in a rehabilitative way, but there's another thing of some level of retribution. And if you look at cases, the one that happened up in Connecticut, for example, where the two guys followed the 11-year-old girl and her mother home, and then broke into the house and killed the mother, did all sorts of depraved things to the 11-year-old daughter and the sister, and then tied them to a bed and set them on fire, while the father, who was incapacitated, could hear his little girls screaming. Yeah, if I was him, I think I'd want the death penalty too. This case in Utah, I don't know enough about. I know that he was accused of having, sexually assaulted the grandchildren, which were, 2 and 3 years old and stuff like that. But does that rise to death penalty status? Well, obviously the laws in Utah says it does. That case with Chris Watts, I think that probably, in my view, would raise to that. We've seen a Netflix documentary, the trials of Gabriel Fernandez, I think his name was. Yeah, that sort of thing. I think that those are sorts of really egregious crimes, Timothy McVeigh, etc. But as a general rule, I'm cautious about that. And also, I will say that I think that a lifetime without parole, especially if you're going to be held in solitary confinement, is probably a worse penalty in many cases than death penalty. And some people I would like to just know are suffering and going to suffer forever. And didn't Manson just die recently? And he was in jail for all of that time. And you can make the argument that he should have got the death penalty, but some of those girls were recently paroled and they're 70, 80 years old. And you look at them and you see how much they've aged, and you see how much of their life has just been wasted. I think that probably sends more of a message personally, but I'll leave it to others to comment.
Yeah,
So I looked up some statistics, and people who study this thing say that up to about 4% of people executed in America were executed in error. And for Texas, the statistics are 10 people have been executed in Texas since 1989, despite strong evidence for their innocence. That's out of about 500 people executed by Texas in that time, which is 2%. And 2% is not a huge percentage, but it's too high if you're talking about killing somebody.
Yep.
Well, but if the alternative is life without the possibility of parole, you might make the argument that it's not much of a difference. But the Pope actually described life without the possibility of parole as being the equivalent of death penalty, especially when it's applied to you.
But look,
I agree. I do agree with you, though. I think that there are certain things like the fact that we know that DNA evidence has improved dramatically. I think that this stuff should be automatically reviewed, and if there is any possibility, so it's one thing to be convicted, but in the appeals process, if there's any reasonable possibility that you aren't actually responsible for the murder or for whatever it is that you've been convicted of, then I think that you may need to consider putting a permanent stay on the execution when evidence has changed or techniques for assessing evidence has changed. But this is why I think that Ron DeSantis, when he came out talking about putting a death penalty there on the books for people that abuse children. Look, I agree with his sentiment. I totally understand where he's coming from, but I'm not sure that that's a good idea. Just like I don't think it's a great idea when you have the death penalty for drugs charges. We see Australians and others that get caught up in this in Asia. My suggestion is that you're not allowed to do it in those countries, so don't do it. But I do think the death penalty is a little harsh for importing drugs.
There was one famous execution in Texas. This guy was got the death penalty for burning his family to death. And before they killed him, the investigators found out that the arson investigator in charge of was an idiot and unqualified and had misinterpreted all these signs of accidental fire, and the evidence actually pointed, when done by competent people, pointed at an accidental fire. They killed the guy anyway.
Yeah, just really quickly.
Yeah, well, this is why those Alford pleas, I think, are so egregious. You see the case in West Memphis, sort of colloquially known as the West Memphis Three, where three teenagers, 16, 17, and 18 years old, were convicted in a very conservative, very Republican part of the country. And basically the evidence that was used to convict them was that these three boys liked listening to Metallica. Metallica was all satanic. It was ridiculous. There was no evidence. I looked into that case quite a lot because I was studying a little bit of law at the time. And it was just absurd. Now, the 18-year-old got the death penalty, the 16-year-old got life plus 40, and the 17-year-old, I can't remember, I believe it was a life sentence. They eventually were freed after being in there for 20 years, but they had to take an Alford plea. And, one of them didn't want to take it, but he took it because it was an all or nothing. All three of them had to take it, or none of them would get it, and he knew that they wanted to execute his friend. And I think that people, including the parents of the three 8-year-old boys that they were accused of killing, have actually come out and said that they believe that these three did not kill them. So I think that the idea behind the death penalty, when you're absolutely sure about something, I can understand. But I think, there's so many flaws in the justice system, and let's be honest, the main places where it is being done is in Republican conservative areas, where I think that people perhaps are less likely to look at the flaws in the system. They tend to trust law and order a little too much, in my opinion.
Before I get to you, hold on a second. Before I get to Utopia and you answer again, Steve and everything. Rick, Steve is here. So, Steve, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to discuss, maybe about Tim Walz or some of the other things going on.
Yeah. Real quickly, I've got even though it's a stormy day today, kind of a busy day. I'm supposed to leave town, but the roads are pretty hazardous. But I'm getting from my Republican friends, they're texting me today saying that they're very happy and they believe that Vice President Harris picked a very liberal candidate, a progressive candidate, and it's going to be far right versus far left, and so they couldn't be happier. My Democratic friends seem to be very excited about him being a school teacher and a veteran, although the dirt mudslinging has already begun with Vance, I think, trying to come here. I think he's here today, Vice Senator Vance, saying that Tim Walz had a DUI, that he wasn't, he was a gun, he wasn't doing certain things in the military. I mean, so I don't know. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to Pennsylvania, some of these other states like Georgia. I think it's yet to be determined, right? I mean, even though he's the Minnesota governor, they may not win Minnesota, and they've got to win Pennsylvania. So it's going to now be the test of, can Governor Walz appeal to these rural voters? Obviously, the vice president liked him, clicked with him, and that's why she said she selected him. My own wife says he reminds me a little bit of a young Joe Biden, kind of, a little bit more of a folksy, kind of like Midwestern kind of guy that people can identify with. But I think it's going to come down to the economy, and Shaquille Latimer is a business guy along with Shaquille. I think the key is, what messages can they say that they're going to get us to a point where prices are lower? What is their plan to deal with the failure of the border, which I think was a liability for the vice president? Abortion rights, reproductive rights, how big of a factor will that be? But I think everyone pretty much here in North Carolina, but we don't want to be cocky, is that I think Mark Robinson's political career is going to be over at least in the next 4 months. I do think that Josh Stein is projected to be the next governor of North Carolina, continuing the tradition of attorney generals that will go now and assume the governorship of the state, the first Jewish governor in the history of North Carolina, and will join the likes of Josh Shapiro as a rising star in the Democratic Party. So anyway, that's what I'm hearing out there. I'd love to get the feedback. Meanwhile, around the world, Russia has declared a state of emergency on the attack. Hamas has named a new leader. That's not really boding well for a ceasefire since he orchestrated the October 7th attacks. So that's really it.
I'll come to the issue with Democrats and Republicans and where they're looking at the moment in coming into your elections. So the betting odds have now changed. The international betting odds have now put Kamala Harris into the lead. Now, I was expecting this to become a bit closer. I wasn't actually expecting her to take the lead. So that's interesting. It's moved now from where it was, a handful of weeks ago with Donald Trump, the odds implying that he had a 70 to 75% chance of winning, to him now having only a 45% chance of winning. I believe that that Kamala Harris and Waltz are going to need to start doing some interviews, unscripted interviews, get asked a few hard questions. I think that otherwise they'll start to lose some momentum. I think that Donald Trump, I don't view it actually as being a hard right, hard left. I think it's a hard left versus a more moderate position. And the reason I say that is because Trump has not really gotten along very well with the conservatives in the Republican Party, and he's certainly not an establishment Republican. So I think that his positions are a little bit more moderate than what they might at first appear.
Shaquille, just
I
really
think that
quickly
Tim Walz has been criticised heavily for, the tampon, the big one they criticise him about is the tampons in boys' bathrooms, the termination of parental rights if you're not prepared to allow your children to go through gender-affirming care, and being a sanctuary state for children in other states that wish to seek out this care. So he's going to have a bit of criticism for that. I don't think that anyone knows enough about him to criticise him too much on a federal level. The stolen valor accusation by JD Vance, that probably will carry some weight. But again, I think that people aren't going to be too swayed by that. The real question, I think, coming into your election is going to be voter enthusiasm. It does appear that there's a little bit more enthusiasm for this Democrat ticket amongst voters, but will that be enough? I'm not sure. And as you've rightly pointed out, without Pennsylvania, I think that the pathways for Democrats to take the presidency or to keep the presidency becomes very, very difficult. Based on the numbers, and look, you guys live there, based on the numbers, I don't see North Carolina switching just yet. Georgia, I think, will come back to Republicans. But the big ones that people have been talking about, New Jersey potentially being in play, and Virginia being in play, and potentially Minnesota. I think that the Harris campaign has got enough strength now that that's not realistic. People were talking about even New York possibly switching, which I didn't think would happen. But what we have seen is a massive reduction in Democrat leads in strong blue areas. So I would tend to think that it might look close and come down to only a handful of states. But I think that when it comes to how many electors one or the other candidate wins, I don't think it's going to be a really close Bush type win. I think it's going to be a really significant win, well over the 300 mark for whichever one of the two parties wins.
Hey, Shaquille, along those same lines and everything, one of the things that I read yesterday, and actually I was talking to a friend of mine that is a Politico. He's been on this show a couple of times before and everything, Jan Cromartie and everything, but he was noticing that there has been a rise throughout the state, not just here in North Carolina, but in Georgia and in one of the other swing states. I think there have been something like 10,500 volunteers that have volunteered for the Kamala Harris campaign and everything. So I'm wondering, will this volunteer push help the election in your mind? You're watching it from the outside, Shaquille, and everything, because it was like 10,500. I think it was like something like 15 or something thousand that had volunteered in.
It'll certainly help when it comes to getting voters registered. Again, that's a part of the American system, which is way different to what we have over here. So, over here you have to vote. We can debate whether that's a good or a bad idea, but I think that getting people registered, that will improve things. But will those people actually be enthusiastic enough? And that's going to be a question, because I think that the media is really are doing what they normally do. They're promoting, they're promoting Democrats. They're trying to run cover for Democrats, and I don't think there's a lot of hard questions being asked. And the result of that is that Democrats are unable, I think, to understand what would not be a motivation for somebody to vote for them. We see that really here in the Labor Party in Australia, is that because the media hasn't asked some real hard questions, they've often incorrectly assumed that the majority of Australians wanted one thing when actually the majority of Australians wanted something else. So I would say the media might make it look better than it is. The other thing I would say is it actually helps Trump to not be in the lead, because his base is going to respond to that more, because they like to be the underdogs and to come back. So Trump, I think, made a mistake a few days ago when one of the polls came out showing that Harris had taken the lead, and he said, it's a biased poll, it's a fake poll, things like that. No, don't do that. Because Kamala Harris said at one of her speeches, I think last week, that she was the underdog. Now that's flipped, so that's going to help him, I think, to try and get some more momentum behind him.
So you still have the DNC, the National Convention, which starts in 11 days, which isn't as big as a bump as it used to be. Nothing is anymore, but that's maybe worth 1% or 2% for at least a while.
Yeah, look, I think after any of the national conventions that there is a bit of a bump. I just fear that the bump has already happened here. It's a bit like the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Not that I would ever wish for there to be another one, but it would have helped him more if that assassination attempt had occurred closer to the election, right? It would have helped him more if the RNC had happened closer to the election. So with Kamala Harris, Joe Biden dropping out and all that sort of stuff, I think that it may not leave enough room.
Actually, think about something. If that assassination attempt would be successful, Trump's rating would go to the sky, right?
Well, any president that's assassinated ends up looking quite good, but I think that would cause a civil war. To be perfectly honest,
Steve, you said you heard something interesting.
And I'm
I'll
going
be
with
hearing
your
a weird.
implication,
Well,
because
I gotta go.
Steve, you said you heard something interesting.
I gotta go in a few minutes, guys. I'm gonna try to be back this evening for World Politics. So Mark sent me the link. But what I'm hearing is just a conspiracy theory out there that Joe Biden, President Biden, planned that this had been planned all along, and that he knew by accepting the debate that he would flub it. That they kept Vice President Harris in the background, knowing that by winning by succeeding him as the nominee, that there would be such a meteoric rise in her popularity, and that the runway would be very short. And the more and more I'm thinking about it, I do think there could be something there, that this thing could have been planned, that they knew he wasn't going to run.
But Steve, this has been proposed
now, right?
This conspiracy theory has been running since they were first on the ticket back in 2020. This is what Republicans and conservatives and moderates were saying all the way back then. Look, I think it does look like a very manipulated political process, and I don't think it's going to play as well as what Democrats think. People might in polling show certain enthusiasm, but I really don't think this is going to play as well as what people think it will.
Okay, here is very simple information what's happened, and it's been already discussed. I don't want to repeat it really all, but remember the release of U.S. Russian hostages business, and Biden he was determined to finish this exchange before he would step down from the nomination, and that's exactly what he did. He finished that, and then he immediately got out of the nomination process. So there's no play, there is no some kind of conspiracy factors and so on. Everything is very simple and logical.
That's not true, Sasha. The way that Republicans are looking at it is that they've spent all this money. They've gone into a debate in good faith. They've gone into a debate quite early in the process. Joe Biden was the nominee.
You,
I'm not saying. Hang on. You asked me a question.
You say they spend a lot of money for nothing.
You asked me. You asked me a question. Sasha,
what are you whining about? Who
Sasha,
cares what these people were preparing for?
Sasha, no,
please.
Sasha.
Well, let's
Sasha,
let
you
Rick
asked me a
No,
question,
Jacoby
right?
didn't
I then
know
started
this.
to answer your question, and then you say, who cares?
I did
Well,
not
then don't
ask
ask
you
the question.
anything. I just explained to you the process. What Democrats?
Yeah, well, and the process is.
It's a
If I can finish, look, Sasha,
single-handed decision.
Sasha,
That's all
look,
that's
I know you can't handle any kind of criticism of Democrats, right? Because you hate Trump so much. But just listen for a
I
second.
do hate
Okay?
Trump as much as all of you together. Okay?
Just listen for a second.
I own it.
Just
Come on,
listen for a second.
You love us and you know it.
What's happened is they've gone into the debate. Now, Joe Biden refused to allow anybody else to come on and debate with him. Nobody was allowed to challenge him in the in the process of the Democrats. They even had write-ins in one of the states. He ends up becoming the presumptive nominee. Then when it looks like he's going to lose badly, he steps down and Kamala Harris just gets coronated like a princess, okay, into that nomination. Other Democrats should have been allowed to go to the convention and make their case, and the delegates should have been able to vote. So when you say that there's no conspiracy theory, or when you say that nobody could possibly think that something went wrong here, I'm not saying that I support Donald Trump and the Republicans, but I'm saying that there is criticism. Well, I'm not American. Why would I? But there is criticism, and also I'll come to that. There is criticism coming, and there is. Now, as for the answer, why not? By the way, as I keep saying, if progressives get their way, this extremely left ticket of the Democrats get their way, they're talking about increasing taxes, putting caps on rent, etc. What that's going to do is it's going to drive up asset prices and it's going to drive up inflation. I am an international investor, meaning I don't have to pay tax. And the number one country I invest in is the United States. And I don't have to pay their taxes. So an increase in asset price in the US helps me. So, and I've said this many times before, financially, progressives being in charge of a country that I don't live in is fantastic for me. I just don't think it's great for the stability of the world.
Something that, if you read a lot of David K. Johnston's stuff, you will see that during Trump, he, increased the tax deductions probably by 40% for the rich and shameless, as I call him with Nick. But he did. He raised the tax cuts for them, causing a heavier weight on the middle class. But let's give Rick a chance to talk.
Is there a way to reduce taxes on the middle class?
Let's go to Jacoby, then me. How about that?
Okay, Jacoby, I know your hand was up before Jacoby, but go ahead.
Both hands up. He was ready to go.
Just to point out, I can understand the conspiracy because the Republican Party, that is their messaging tool. They utilize conspiracies, whatever the facts may say, it's not going to matter. That is their messaging tool. They've been begging for Biden to back out for a long time, and then when he does, they then turn and say, well, it was an undemocratic process. It was actually a democratic process in the fact that the people in the Democrat Party weren't really behind Biden. Also, just to point out in terms of the idea that Biden could not do the challenge, nobody was able to challenge him. Well, there were people on the ticket that did challenge him. They never got anything. They got less than 10% of the vote. They got maybe 5% of the vote across the board on each state. On top of that, every incumbent president really doesn't have a regular challenger. And that goes back, for decades. So even Trump, when he ran in 2020, he didn't have a challenger on his side. But again, there was no conspiracy or idea that nobody challenged him and blah, blah, blah. In terms of, and then we forget that Donald Trump never went to any of the debates on the Republican ticket. He avoided all of them. He was already coronated as the actual Republican nominee because he had that ticket locked down. Hence the reason, even before the primary started on the Republican side, they stated that everybody should just stay home anyway. So that, just needless to say, I understand the conspiracy part of it, but there's no true conspiracy. What ended up happening is that and this is why we're looking at the actual energy that's there on the Democrat ticket right now, is because the Democrat Party begged for Biden to step down. That was their biggest flaw, was his age. And that's what the Republican Party had spent so much money campaigning against, was his age. They never talked about the economy as much as they should have. They never talked about immigration as much as they should have. It was all about Biden was flubbing this and could not speak. He's old. He's old. So once he stepped down, the Republican Party is now flailing, trying to come up with anything possible to stick to Kamala. But the problem they're having is that the Democrat process that took place, because more than 70% of the Democrat Party wanted Kamala to be the next individual to be in that position. Hence the reason why she had to make calls in this past 17 days to all the electors, to actually garner the support and actually win the ticket. Because we have to remember that you don't have to, really the primary itself is more so people in the states telling the electors their idea of the person that they want. So truthfully, you're not truthfully electing your person. You're telling the electors that this is the person that we want. So then the electors go to the convention and then they decide on based on what the people suggested. So what she did, she ended up having to go through the actual process of calling the electors. So it was a democratic process. So again, that energy built up because the part, and this is what I said yesterday, the party itself begged for somebody new. The party got somebody new. Everybody's ecstatic over that. So that energy is there. Then the progressive wing, yes, Walz fits in that progressive wing. That's why the Bernie Bros and Bernie Sanders and everybody else are so ecstatic about that. So the whole party, the majority of the Democrat Party is unified behind the Kamala Walz ticket right now and pushing forward. That's one bump. But we haven't seen the actual DNC bump. And once that DNC bump happens, because sadly, Trump did not receive a major bump, which he should have, behind the assassination attempt. He didn't receive a giant bump behind the RNC because it was blunted by the announcement of Kamala Harris jumping in there. So that's why right now in the Marist poll, which 2 weeks ago had Trump ahead by 1 point, but now has Kamala Harris ahead by 3 points. So we're seeing a big swing. The independents are shifting to Kamala. And when we get down to it, also another energy thing, and this is what I talked about yesterday, which is a big thing. When you have that negative energy of what JD Vance is pulling on that ticket, and that is the biggest misstep that Donald Trump did, because he started out with a -6 rating, and now he's down to a -11 rating. He's pulling that ticket down for Donald Trump, which is hurting him. And when he's going on the tarmac, hunting behind her, that is a huge problem for Donald Trump, who needs to focus directly on the economic issues and the actual immigration issues, and that would give him a legitimate shot. But right now, he's doing these personal attacks. JD Vance is ticking off veterans with his attacks on the service that Walz had for 24 years, and claiming that he's stolen valor. That's ticking off veterans more so than it's helping him garner veterans. So these problems are coming into play. And it, again, that energy, you have positive energy that's talking about everybody, and now you have negative energy on the other side.
So
Before you go, there's a technical issue. So I'm not talking about the show. There's a technical issue with your broadcast.
Let me talk.
There's a technical issue with your broadcast on YouTube.
Come on. It's based on the first couple days of Walz and Harris. Their strength seems to be able to do happy talk, smiling talk, at the same time with a little toughness mixed in, where Harris last night shut down some hecklers in a tough-looking way. Now, I just saw this interesting thing, this new attack on Walz, which isn't going to go anywhere. This tweet says Tim Walz, at age 60, has zero investments, no stocks, bonds, crypto, real estate, mutual funds. And then the comment, the correction to that tweet is, Walz says that politicians should not own investments because it leads to conflicts of interest, which, sounds good to me. He even sponsored a bill to limit politicians' investments. And so Walz seems to be like a good combination, like common sense, gun reform. At the same time, there's a bunch of pictures of him showing with a gun, his hunting dog with a rifle, and like him posing with a bird he shot. He likes to shoot stuff. So, okay.
Hey, Rick, along those same lines, and this is for everybody.
There was a technical issue with the broadcast on
They're
YouTube.
dealing with immigration. How much was that immigration push? Because even coming back to our death penalty conversation, they're doing that Willie Horton thing where they are saying that some of the people that came across the border were those that murdered some certain individuals. Because I've seen that commercial running here in North Carolina several times. So it does seem like they're trying to push
Immigration should be an issue. It's Harris's, it's the Biden administration's maybe their greatest vulnerability. So instead of talking about stolen valor and crap like that, they should concentrate on actual issues and make Harris respond.
That's one of the things I haven't seen is a response yet, because it seems like they were playing off of the laughing Kamala too, because one of the ads had her laughing while saying that basically she's doing the fiddling while Roman.
She naturally smiles a lot and laughs a lot. The Hillary was criticized for the artificiality of her laughter. Well, I don't think that works with Harris because she seems like that's the person she is.
Mm-hmm. And yet there is a way that Republicans can win the election. There is only one thing what they can do. Take these two weirdos, Trump and Vance, to shut down their mouths and keep quiet. And that's only their way to win the election. There's no other way.
There's a technical issue with your broadcast on YouTube. You might want to have a look at that.
I'll get Sean to look into that. I know that there was
because I said a bad word.
No, I was trying to interrupt you to say there was a technical issue with your broadcast on YouTube.
All right, well, sorry.
Well,
Right.
we see you fine here and when it's finally recorded. So just keep going. Sometimes when you might think it's frozen.
What happened?
But,
what happened
I
was
think
that Chitovi would. Okay, it's up to you guys. You guys are the producers.
All right. So I think that Mark, were you wanting to say something?
No, I was just asking that question. I didn't know if anybody had any response to it, because that is a winning point, I think, maybe for the Republicans, this notion of the immigration. And also they were saying that she was sleeping, and ironically, I wish Steve was here, they were saying that to some degree, there's a whole argument about fentanyl has been played by both parties, Republican and Democrats, in the gubernatorial race here in North Carolina. So it does seem like both of these issues that are coming from the border could be issues that could play positively for the Republicans. But I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts around that, or is that something that Democrats need to be concerned about?
When Chitovi was speaking, Chitovi was coming up over Dan Worthington, like on the right-hand side where all of us were. Then when Rick started speaking, Chitovi was the only one who was actually on the big screen, not Rick. That's what the issue was. I'm not sure how the sound is coming out. I'll just quickly address the border. That's the weak spot for Democrats. That and the economy seems like it's the weak spot. I think, as has been pointed out, abortion can be one of the weak spots for Republicans, but also Republicans, tend to look like they're a little bit out of touch with some people. And I think they're beginning to lose a little bit of momentum because they're not saying anything new. And I think that when they're promoting things like family values, but they're not talking about how those families are going to be able to survive, how they're supposed to support having children and things like that, that can be a weak spot. But it's gonna come down to how the candidates actually express their vision. And I don't think that Donald Trump is doing as good a job as he used to do. It's one thing to point out what the flaws are. It's another thing to actually be able to articulate and lay out a plan for the future, which I don't think he's doing a very good job of at the moment. I still, though, tend to think that he's going to win this election, because I think that the close margins in the Rust Belt, plus the fact that you're seeing places like Nevada look like they could swing back to him, which would be the first time that's happened for quite a long time. I think Georgia will come back. It's really going to come down to Pennsylvania. I think that if in early on the night, if Pennsylvania looks like it's going to Republicans and Trump wins it, I think that the pathways forward for the Harris campaign are going to be very, very difficult.
So to your point and everything, Shaquille, one of the things that I did see on one of the YouTubes recently and everything was just what you said. There was a Trump rally, and the Trump gentleman, actually he was pro-Trump, asked the Trump over a phone call what you just asked, because he said that he's got, I think, 8 kids and stepkids, and he said that he has given money to 5 of them. So he wanted to know what Trump's answer to that was going to be economically. And Trump went on an answer about how bacon prices had doubled and a number of other things, because the guy was really asking about the rent, because part of what he's doing is he's giving money to these individuals to help them with their rent and all along those lines. So I think a lot of the critics was that he didn't really answer the question, even though it was a pro-Trump rally and the person that asked him was a Trump person and everything, because like I said, they were
okay, but Harris saying that she's going to put a cap on rents, that's not going to work. It doesn't work. It's been tried in your country, it's been tried in other countries. Putting caps on things just doesn't work.
I'm sure that's going to get negotiated down, but also you got to remember that Trump's solution was a 10% tariff and 100% tariff on other places. So, I mean, Trump's Trump's economic plan is pretty disastrous for everybody here as well.
It's for
that
the
wasn't
rich.
the solution
It's
to
really
inflation.
manipulated for the rich. It looks like it's for the poor, but when you tell people no taxes on tips, you're not helping the problem. That's not helping anybody. But
Kimberly, what do you want? If you say that all the tax cuts go to the rich, they can't give tax cuts to the poor because the poor aren't paying any. What's it like 50% of taxes paid by the top 10% of the country? The bottom 50% pay nothing effectively?
So you know who ends up paying? The middle class. Yes, Rick.
Well, I mean, federal taxes, no federal taxes on the bottom 50%. If you want to give tax relief to the poor, you have to figure out how to get them a rebate on the taxes they do pay. Social Security, withholding, sales tax. That becomes like weird and hard to do. Also, the last time price controls worked in America was during World War II, when America was united to make sacrifices. That's not the America we're in right now.
So I know Trump got rid of SALT deductions, but the things like Social Security are things that directly benefit those people.
Right.
But Kimberly makes the point that the middle class is paying taxes. Yes, but the middle class are also the ones getting most benefit out of the services provided by government.
We don't get 40% tax cuts.
And
whenever
Social Security really isn't a tax. It's you're supposed to be, you get money pulled from your check and set aside with the guarantee that you'll get money back in your old age or disability.
Yeah, which is a terrible program, but that's not the issue, in my opinion. That it's a terrible program. They should just privatize the thing. But look, if you want them not to pay that either, somebody has to pay at some point, and you can't just stack everything against the rich, because you know what the rich do? They move if they can. That's what they do. And I know, because that's why I've moved. I moved away from Australia because I don't want to give up half of what I earn. And people go, "Oh, well, you're just being greedy." Yeah, I earned it. I'm not giving you half. If your tax rates are reasonable, I'll pay them. Otherwise, I'm out of here.
Yeah,
do the taxes for everyone, each category, and then you'll see what happens. And that's what I tell people. Instead of talking about it and complaining about it, sit down and do the taxes, because it doesn't matter how much more you tax the rich. If they have deductions, it's not even going to touch them. So you can sit there and go, we're going to tax them another 10%. but they have so many deductions it doesn't hit them. And I have processed taxes, but we're at the last minute. I'm going to hand it over to Mark to wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
No, another great conversation. We'll come back later on this evening on World Politics. We might talk about some of these political divides and some of these other things that are going on at that particular time and all along those lines, because I actually saw a television show that actually mentioned the divide, and they were saying that that's what they were frustrated with and all along those lines with the divide and all in that space. And it was actually, I think that they were praising the Olympics, because this was a time with the Olympics that they saw less of a divide and people that were celebrating their country and celebrating their pride in their country. So on that note, we'll get on out of here, and we'll be back at 5 o'clock with World Politics.